Hey friends, it's Simon Hurley and welcome to another video. Today I'm going to share some really fun and innovative die cutting hacks to stretch your dies and supplies for your card making projects. So we're going to use your die cutting supplies in ways you might not have thought of. And I'll have all the supplies listed and linked down below so you can check it out. And using those links helps support me, so I really appreciate it. Now without further ado, let's get into it. Now for this first technique, I'm going to do a layered stencil effect using my dies. And I'm using the Brilliant Butterflies die set. I love this one because there's tons of butterfly size options with really amazing details on these. And I also wanted to share a new storage solution that I found. These are magnetic cards that I purchased from Stampin' Storage. I purchased the ones in 6 by 7 inches, but you can get them in lots of different sizes. But what I love about them is just how thick and sturdy these magnet boards are. They're not flimsy, so your dies aren't going to fall off of here. And they're really easy to store your dies and make sure they stay nice and stuck on there. I get lots of questions about my die storage, so I'll link these down below in case you guys want to check this out. For this card, I'm going to grab 2 of the medium-sized butterflies, so I'll just go in here and grab these guys, and I'm just using the detailed layers, not necessarily the frames that go along with them. To do my die cutting, I'm going to use my 3-inch mint masking tape. I really love this stuff. This 3-inch roll is super versatile because you can make some really great masks out of it. So I've just taken a pretty substantial piece and I'm going to lay it down onto the cleaner die cutting plate that I have here because we don't want a lot of little pieces getting all up in the tape. Then I'm going to take my butterflies, place them right down over top of the tape, just leaving a little bit of space in between each one. Then I'll run this right through my die cutting machine to cut it out. And then you want to slowly and gently peel off the mint masking tape, and this is going to create some really great masks for our card making projects. So what's awesome about this is you have both the negative and the positives for the butterfly. So these are great for stenciling down the butterfly, and then you can add in your detail with these pieces. You could do this with tons of dies in your collection. If they have detailed, intricate areas like that, you can cut them out and you'll have 2 different layers for stenciling. And for these, I'll just go in using a little tweezers to start peeling them off, and then remove them easily. And then we've got the great detailed mask cut out of that mint tape. All right, perfect. Now you could position these on your card however you want to for the scene, but what I'm gonna do is just lay it right down onto my cardstock because I think I'm gonna do some die cutting with these. So I'll sort of lay it down, and then once it's kind of in place, I'll press it down onto my cardstock to make sure that it's nice and stuck in place. Now whenever you're inking something like this, these sort of tapes don't necessarily stick to ink because ink stays wet for quite a bit of time. So I'm going to place the second layer right on top of these butterflies as well, because we're going to do the more detailed second layer first, so that way these masks will actually stick down to the surface as we're doing our blending and not lift up. And then same thing down here, I'll add this butterfly into that space first, and then we can do the second layer first. All right, now when I go in and do my stenciling, I'm gonna use these mini blending brushes from Altenew. I really like these to get into more detailed areas like the butterflies, and they come in packs of 3. So I've got 1 for each color family stored in this lipstick organizer, which has been a really great storage solution for these. All right, so I'm starting off with a little bit of Prom Queen first, and this layer is going to be the darkest layer. Even though we're doing it first, these details we want to be the darkest on the card. So I'm just going in using these detail blending brushes and go in and add color down onto the surface. And I'm gonna do these butterflies kind of two-toned, so I'm adding color down about halfway onto the butterfly, extending it just a little bit so that there's a nice blend. And that way when we go in with our next color, which here I'm using a little bit of Shooting Star, we can go right onto the surface and sort of blend it upward. And then in between, you'll get a new color. So you can see there's kind of an orange forming in there where those colors mix, since they're translucent dye-based inks, and you get a really beautiful, smooth, and seamless blend. Then for this bottom butterfly, I'm going in using the red blending brush and a little bit of Bee Sting ink, and I'm going pretty heavy-handed again because we want this to be the darker layer, and just blending that about halfway up on the butterfly. And then to fill this one out, I'm going in using a little bit of Guppy, which is this nice yellowish orange color, and I'm gonna blend that right into the red, and you can see again, these inks really blend so smooth and seamlessly from one color into the next. Now once we're done with this darker layer, we can go in with our tweezers and just lift off these masks pretty easily. You want to do it gently, and once we got it started, we can sort of peel it off. And there we go, we got that really nice bright white line there then. And then I'll go into the second one, start off with my tweezers, and then peel it off to reveal that beautiful blending and that crisp white line. And I love that this mint tape doesn't rip my cardstock whatsoever. It's my favorite thing about mint tape is that I know that after I'm done with my project, it's not gonna rip the cardstock. Now you could leave it just like this if you want to, but I'm actually gonna go back in using those same blending tools. We don't even need to add any more ink to the surface, and I'm just going to lightly blend over the top and add a little bit of that same tone, but lighter on top of the surface. Then I'm going back in with bee sting, again just using the excess ink that's still on my blending brush and blending it right over top of that butterfly. I like to do this step because it sort of just helps fill out the rest of the shape of the butterfly and just tones down the white a little bit to make it less stark white and sort of helps fill out the color a little bit more. And then last but not least, I'll do the same thing with the excess of the yellow on my blending brush and blend it right over top of the surface. Then I'll go in and slowly and gently peel off my mint tape to reveal these beautiful butterflies that we blended out. I absolutely love that effect by using both layers to create the darker and the lighter areas of these butterflies. And now here's the cool part. If your die set also has these sort of shadow dies that are just a little bit bigger, like the Brilliant Butterfly set does, you can then go in, line these up right over top of your images with a little bit of a white border, and then I'll use some mint tape to hold that in place while we run it through our die cutting machine. And then we'll run this right through my die cutting machine to cut it out. And check out just how beautiful those are, blended out and cut out with that perfect white border around the butterflies. I absolutely love how they turned out. To create my background, I'm going to use the Scene Maker stencil, which is really great for building scenes, and I want to create a sky, so I'm going to use the clouds on the side. We gave you a lot on the stencil, so you're going to need to do some masking when you do your blending. So I'm just going to go in here and mask off the images on this side so I can just get the clouds. So for these clouds, I'm going to go in here and tape my stencil down, and then I'll go in using a little bit of breakup blue ink, which is just a little bit darker than my light blue cardstock that I'm using. And then I'll just kind of blend the edges onto my cardstock, nice and gently using my domed foam blending tool to get a nice fade out of color. And then when we lift this off, you'll see the cloud is left nice and light, and then there's kind of a shadow of blue right underneath it. So instead of using the stencil all the way up in the center like this, you want to sort of move it around a little bit so you get some variation in the sky and it doesn't all look the same as you're blending. So just be sure that as you move up, you sort of shift your stencil and angle it in different directions to make it look like all different clouds on your background. And then if you start on one side and leave it hanging like that, you can then go back in with a different side of the stencil, line it up, and blend it out. Super easy. And you can even flip the stencil over to get even another effect. We'll just blend that out. And then again, match it up on the other side and finish everything off. And then I'll just continue to blend up the background like this, adding lots of ink and moving my stencil and shifting it in different ways to make it look like different clouds all the way up the background. And check that out. I love that really great three-dimensional look that these clouds give the background and how you can just use one stencil to create a whole beautiful look. And this stencil is super versatile. You can create tons of different scenes with mountains or grass and different sky elements to finish everything off really nicely. And I'm gonna go in here, adding a little bit of tape runner down to adhere this onto my card. I'll start at the top fold, and with this panel, I'm going to leave an even border on either side, line it up at the top, and it should line up all the way down then. And then I'll press it into place. And then I'll add some foam tape onto the back of these to pop them up, and I'm just putting the foam tape right in the center there. I'll sort of line these up on an angle so they look like they're flying up the card, and then we can place them down for some nice dimension. And the reason I just did it in the center is so you can kind of pop these wings up a little bit more, give them some dimension, and make them look like they're flying. Now to finish this off, we're gonna use a sentiment from the Butterfly Kisses set. I love this because there's tons of great sentiments that go along with these beautiful butterflies. And I like to use the clear sheet to sort of see which sentiments fit in the different areas. And I think I'm gonna use the sentiment that says spread your wings and fly. That'll fit really nicely and it's super encouraging. So I'll add it onto an acrylic block. And I'm gonna do some white heat embossing on black cardstock. So I'll add my anti-static powder tool to make sure no powder sticks where we don't want it. And then I'll go in with my clear sticky Versamark ink and cut my sentiment and stamp it down into my black cardstock. Then I'll go in with my white heat embossing powder, sprinkle it right over top, tap off any of the excess. And I find lately blowing off the excess also helps to get rid of some of the powder. And then we'll heat set this so it's nice and bright white. And then I'll go in with my Fiskars Spring Assist scissors to cut this out. And I'm leaving a little bit of a border all the way around the sentiment. I like to go in and take an extra minute to do this because I find that it finishes it off a little bit more than just leaving it on a big rectangle of cardstock. And these scissors make it super easy to cut out because they got that spring, so they spring back out at you so your hands don't get tired. And then I'll add the sentiment on some foam tape right on top of the butterfly, kind of overlapping it, and that finishes it off beautifully. So here's a closer look at that finished card. I love how it turned out with that double layered stenciling effect using the butterfly dies to get that really great 3D look, and then finishing everything off with that beautiful stenciled background using the clouds from the Scene Maker stencil. It just turned out so gorgeous. For this next technique, I'm going to show you how to add really beautiful texture to your die cuts using stencils or stamps. So here I'm going to go in using the tiny circle stencil. This is one of my favorite because it's a nice small design, but it's a bold pattern, which is really easy to see once you die cut things out of it. This is like creating your own patterned cardstock, and for this I'm going to choose a color that's similar or a little bit darker than the colored cardstock that we're using. So here I'm using a little bit of Over the Moon, which is a beautiful mid-tone yellow color, and I'm going to cover quite a bit of this surface so that I can do some die cutting out of it. And then we get this beautiful dotted pattern all throughout the cardstock. And I'll follow up and do this across several different colors. So here I'm going in with the mid-tone yellow, and I'm gonna use a little bit of Slippery and Wet and blend this across the whole surface again. So it's a pretty easy thing to do to just add this pattern and texture across several different pieces of cardstock. And when we lift this off, check out that beautiful design across this mid-tone color. And last but not least, we're gonna go in on this darkest color and blend down a little bit more Slippery and Wet, but here I'm using a heavier hand to blend this one out so that we get a little bit of a more saturated tone. And when we lift this off, check out that beautifully blended pattern. So now we've done this across all three colors to create that nice consistent pattern across the cardstocks. You could use pattern paper for this, but I don't keep much pattern paper in my craft room because I like to make my own colored backgrounds like this to match whatever project I'm doing. Next I'm going to do a couple shades of pink, and again I'm going to go in using a color that's a little bit darker. So for this mid-tone color I'm using a bit of Rosy Cheeks, and I'm just going to blend it across the surface to keep this pattern consistent throughout our whole project. You could switch up your stencils, but I like to have the pattern consistent across several different layers and across the whole card so that it doesn't make things too busy. And then next for this, I'll bring in my darker pink color and a little bit of Prom Queen, which is this really beautiful hot pink color, and finish it off by blending this design across the darker colored cardstock. And there we have that blended across the darker color as well for the two different layers of my pink. So there we have all the different colors that we need for our different florals and leaves to do our die cutting for our card project. For this, I'm going to use this die set called In Bloom, and I'm going to use this largest flower for all the die cutting that we're doing in today's project. So it's these 4 layers that go along with it. And then I'll grab some of the leaves for the project as well. So for the yellow, I'm going to die cut the biggest piece out of the darkest color, and then the middle piece out of this mid-tone. And I'll also die cut one of the centers out of this mid-tone too. And we'll run that through our die cutting machine to cut it out. Then for this pink, I'm going to die cut this middle layer as well. And I'll also die cut some leaves out of this lighter color. Then again, I'll die cut this middle piece out of the lighter pink as well. And we'll go back in and do some leaves on this darker color too. Now to adhere these pieces together, I'm going to add a little bit of liquid glue down onto the surface. And then I'm going to just place that smaller piece on top of this large flower and give it some good pressure. And then I cut out a little centerpiece that I'm going to add some glue down and easily glue this right down into the center of our floral. And then we can just lift up some of these petals a little bit to give it some dimension and check out that beautiful 3D floral that we have. And then for this floral, I cut out 2 of the smaller one because you can also layer these together. So I'm just gonna add a little bit of glue down, and then I'll just rotate the floral so that the darker petals kind of stick right in between these lighter ones to give it some dimension, but it doesn't make it as big of a flower. So those dark pieces just kind of poke out of the edges. Then again, I'll add some glue to the center, and we can add our centerpiece right onto the flower. Now another fun way to use your dies is by doing some embossing to get an impressed background. I'm going to do this today using the Flip Flop Chevron Background Die. I love this one, and I think it's going to add a great embossed texture to my background. For this, you're going to need your A platform base and B platform top. Then we'll go in with layer E, which is this rubberized mat that's going to be used for embossing. This is going to be what gives the embossing sandwich that little bit of cush so that nothing cuts out and just gives a great impression. Then I'm going to go in using some stark white cardstock, and for this we're going to want to mist it down with 2 to 3 mists of water. This will make the cardstock have a little bit of give, so that instead of cutting, it'll just add some pressure. And then we'll place the die, and you want it with the cutting edge facing towards this rubberized mat. Then we'll go in using the D adapter plate and lay that right down on top of the surface, and we'll run this right through our die cutting machine. And check out that really great texture you get. I absolutely love it. And that embossing plate is so much fun because it really brings a ton of versatility with your dies since you can emboss any one of them. Now this textured kind of embossed surface is really great to add inks to. So I'm gonna go in using a little bit of breakup blue, and I wanna create kind of a sky or a grounding place for the flowers that we've created. So I'm going in and I'm just going to blend this up the surface about 3/4 of the way up. And you'll see that as I blend, those raised surfaces sort of really catch the ink and create this beautiful design that's a little bit more intense on the surface. It really highlights things nicely. And then to add more depth and dimension to the bottom, I'm going in using a little bit of No Diving, which is kind of a mid-tone blue color. And I'm just going to blend this right onto the bottom and fade it right back out into that breakup blue color. And then I'll sort of line these florals up on my card so that they kind of cascade across the card here, and I'll add them on some foam tape to give it a little bit of dimension. So I've arranged the leaves in little groupings all around the florals, and once I have them in places that I like, I'm gonna go in using a little bit of liquid glue on the edge here, and then I could just slip them right underneath the floral and adhere them down into place. So this is a good way to do things. I just like to test everything out first by sliding it underneath, and then once I find a place that I like, then I go in with the glue to finalize it. And when I'm doing leaves, I like to do things in little groupings, so I'll usually do 2 or 3 leaves kind of right next to each other. I find that it looks really good that way. And then I also kind of add leaves in visual triangles like this, because I find that it looks better in groupings of 3. Your eye is naturally drawn to that. And I've been using this Barely Art Glue to adhere these together, and I've really liked it so far. I really like the fine point tip that's on this bottle. It's really gonna be nice and easy for adhering little areas on die cuts. So I've been using this a couple times so far, and so far I really like it. So I'll link it down below so you guys can check it out. To finish this card off, I'm gonna use the Sending Hugs Foiled Sentiment. I absolutely love this hot foil plate and die set. It's the must-have sentiment, and it foils and cuts 6 really great sentiments at once, so you have lots made for all your different card making projects. I'm gonna use Sending Hugs foiled in gold, and I'll pop it up on some foam tape for some dimension in this extra area here. And here's a closer look at that finished card. I love how those florals turned out using the polka dots to add some really great texture and playful character to the florals, and then finishing it off with that gorgeous background, just adding texture instead of cutting everything out, so it creates some really great depth and dimension on the surface. I love embossing dies for tons of texture, and it's a really great way to use your dies and stretch your supplies. Alright you guys, I hope you really enjoyed today's video and all of those die cutting techniques. If you did, please give it a big thumbs up and leave me a comment down below letting me know which of those cards is your favorite. Also down there is a full supplies list to everything I used, and using those links helps support me, so I really appreciate it. Thank you so much for stopping by and spending some time with me, and I'll see you all soon. Have a great day. Bye!